Welcome, I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore concepts with the objective of improving your management skills and growing your business. Grab a notepad, grab a pen, because I want you to take notes and I want you to make a commitment to yourself that you will jot down some sort of action item that you can implement in your business today. Remember, that's what this is all about, implementation to drive your business forward. Today, we're gonna take a deeper dive and a closer look at email campaigns and lead nurturing. Recently, I was asked to advise someone on best practices revolving around the same, and I thought this would be a good thing to record a video on and let you guys take a look at and explore this as well, because it has changed and evolved throughout the years, and yet the basic concepts are what I try to communicate. So let's look at this a little bit deeper, and hopefully you'll take away something that can help you generate more conversions, more revenues, and drive your business forward, as we like to say. All right, so the first thing is to think about the whole concept of follow-up and customer follow-up or lead follow-up, and think about what you're trying to accomplish there. Always begin with the end in mind. What is your objective? Your objective is to try to convert leads into revenue, into sales. So you want to conquest new customers and you want to retain your existing customers. These are all very worthy objectives, things that you can understand. So when we get too granular, when we sort of think about all the details of setting up email campaigns and everything, that can clutter your minds, and it can, I guess, distract you from focusing on what you need to remember is the foundational, the basics. Begin with the end in mind. What are your objectives? And it's very clear what your objectives are. So you kind of have to visualize the whole process of follow-up. Now, there are two types of follow-up, or maybe two categories of follow-up. You can think of follow-up as being synchronous or asynchronous, and I've covered follow-up in at least 2 other videos before. You should look at those and get a deeper dive into those concepts. We've talked about the categories of follow-up for pre-sale follow-up, where you're trying to convert a lead into a customer. We've talked about post-sale, prior to delivery follow-up, and then post-delivery follow-up, and we covered that in greater details in another video. But when we look at synchronous or asynchronous, this once again comes down to the effectiveness of communication. So if you think about examples of synchronous follow-up, which is, you might meet someone face to face, you have a follow-up lunch with somebody and find out how they're doing. And synchronous follow-up methods, such as a phone call or a meeting, or a video conference, these are far more resource intensive. They're more expensive, and so these are used by those organizations, those companies, that the net result of a conversion, the sale, allows for greater profitability. Those of you who are operating in industries or a type of business where you either, one of two things, you either just don't have the resources in terms of your manpower and ability to follow up synchronously, or it's impractical from a cost point of view, because maybe you're selling a very low ticket item or low margin item, and you can't build in the costs of having somebody actually spend the time is money, to synchronously follow up. Then you come to asynchronous follow-up. And of course, asynchronous follow-up would include things such as email, text messages, voice messages, and so on. And so there's where the category lay for email campaigns and lead nurturing. So I want you to think of these things. So first, we're gonna focus on the idea of email campaigns, lead nurturing in general. And it should go without saying, based on the comments I've already made, that this is more practical for those of you who have limited resources or manpower to be able to follow up with people synchronously, or you have lower margins. So it's much more resource friendly, so to speak, form of follow-up. And email campaigns I think of them in terms of a spectrum. So on one end of the spectrum, you have, I guess it wouldn't be an email campaign, it would just simply be an email, a personalized, custom written email. You're following up with a lead and you're taking the time to compose an email on the spot. That's one end of the spectrum. And as you continue down the spectrum, you would go to maybe a plain text, a text only email that is still personalized. So you may have, either add some customized composing where you're actually going in and inserting the person's name and maybe a couple of details on top of a template. So think of the template-based email, and then I guess the template email can be plain text, like I just gave you that description, or it could be then going down the spectrum. It may be plain text and it's not customized in any way. You don't add anything to it and you don't even actually personalize it. Or you could have a more richly formatted, and I know, rich format text is a Microsoft product. What I'm meaning to say here is HTML or rich formatted emails that include things like hyperlinks and images, headers, footers. They're highly designed and they may have attachments, that kind of thing. So that's on the other end of the spectrum. And of course you can make those using dynamic placeholders, which are just really code snippets that allow for things to be inserted to make it more customized within the document. So that's the spectrum. And what are the best practices? What should I use? And it really comes down to, again, the answer is, well, begin with the end in mind. What is your objective and what are your constraints? What resources can you put at this? I think the best approach for many businesses is well-rounded, where you're using a combination of those things based on how hot the lead is and how big a deal, or how much, the volume of sales or the amount of the overall sales. What sort of level of profit can you get out of this? What's at stake in terms of your conversion? And the extent to which there's greater stakes, then you want to invest more resources and be more highly effective. So think about those things in terms of effectiveness and efficiency. And we've talked before where these are inversely related concepts, but it's a reality. You use both as the context, as the environment allows for, or makes it more practical to use one or the other. So where to start is to really consider your customer journey. We said we're going to begin with the end in mind. So you want to sort of create a workflow and a blueprint that it's really just a flow chart that basically shows what you want to have happen depending on the response from the customer. So it's if-then statements like, okay, so if the customer came on the website and converted to asking for a price quote, then the following would occur. If they added to their cart and they did not, and they abandoned their cart, then the following would occur. And you just have this flow, this blueprint that you create that tells your system, we're gonna talk about the automation of this, and sort of my mind's racing ahead of all these thoughts here. You may not have any kind of software that allows for this. I shouldn't be presumptuous, and certainly reach out to us. We can get you this software that can handle all of this stuff for you very inexpensively. But I want you to start thinking of it in terms of fundamentally the customer journey is what we're talking about here. So you may not be actually designing this in a piece of software yet. I don't care if you're doing it on the back of a napkin on that notepad that's in front of you now. Consider what is your customer journey and what are the conversions that you want him to take. And when he does not take those conversions, when those conversions fail to be made, what do you then want to have happen? And that's where we come into follow-up. Well, I want to follow up with my customer because my objective is to continue him down the journey, down the funnel to conversion, to eventually lead to a sale, to revenue, and to profit. And then I want to retain those. So you've got to design that. And this is where the work is involved. This is the best practice, number one, is spend your time considering the customer journey and all the different points where a customer might exit the sales process, and how could you reintroduce them into the sales process through the concept of follow-up. And then you can start to introduce, well, what kinds of follow-up are we going to use? The further down the line they are, the hotter they are as a lead, or the greater what's at stake in terms of the sale, you will change your strategy based on all of those things. Now, when we're looking at, as was being really asked of me in this particular advice, is what kind of email campaign should I use? Should I actually type out the email? Should I use automations? That was the first advice I gave as well. Well, what's at stake here? What kind of business? This kind of thing you're asking yourself. But there's more than that to consider. Web-based or web mail systems, as well as other email clients, will handle those emails differently. So one of the benefits to using a plain text email is that it's very unlikely to be flagged as spam. Whereas HTML, very rich email, formatted, highly formatted email, can be sometimes identified by a webmail system as a newsletter right away and put into a separate folder. Many webmaster or webmail email clients automatically do that, or sometimes they even flag them as spam. So you want to give consideration to that. Remember, what is our objective? Our objective is conversion. Another objective we have that leads to conversion is you want your email to be opened and read. So consider, what do you need to do to increase the chances of that? And the opposite of what you want to occur, your counter objective, if you will, is for your customer, your lead, to opt out. You certainly don't want them to mark you as spam or just to delete your email, to ignore it. That is counterproductive to your objectives that you want to accomplish. Now, as you're creating this workflow, which eventually becomes a blueprint, and we set that up, and probably we're going to set that up in software and design email campaigns around that, you want to give consideration at each of those conversion points, at each of those points where a customer may leave the trail to the sale, the sales journey, the sales process, they exit it, and where you want to get them back in. You want to form groups. And so those groups can be defined based on how hot the lead is, based on what a person may have or may not have purchased, where in the journey they exited. So I hope you understand what I mean by these buckets, these categories, these groups of leads. You want to define people and separate them out. You don't want to treat everyone the same. That's obvious. So that's what I mean when I say take things back to instead of getting too detailed into the software and all that kind of stuff, it's important to know how to use that, and we can do that. We can set all this up for you. But what you really need to understand is, what am I trying to accomplish here? What are my objectives? So when you create a group, you understand intuitively, well, I would never, if this was just me manually following up with a customer with the objective of converting him, making him a customer, from taking from a stranger, from a lead to an actual paying customer, I would not treat everyone the same. There would be all sorts of conditions that I would want to filter based on just manually in my brain and treat them differently. Well, it's the same thing. We're gonna teach our system, we're gonna teach our email campaign software through the blueprint, through the workflow analysis. We're gonna teach it to do exactly what we would do as human beings who are manually sorting through this stuff. So what you're doing now is you're taking and you're putting that time in, instead of on one-off situations where that's not practical to do for many of you. You're going to put all that effort into the design of your blueprint and the categorization of your different types of leads. And you're going to need to do this. You're going to need to maintain the categories and the groupings as you go forward. So as an example, somebody who maybe inquired and got a price quote from you, maybe you're a contractor, some sort of tradesperson, and maybe you're going to do a renovation, someone's bathroom, kitchen, basement, whatever the case may be. They got a price quote, and then you didn't hear back from them within a certain length of time. You might, because of the stake, what's at stake there, that's a big contract, maybe you may decide, well, the first thing I'm going to do in my blueprint is I'm going to follow up with them. I'm going to make a phone call. And to the extent that, or if I cannot get an answer on the phone call, I may then eventually leave a message. So maybe the next day you leave a message. You didn't hear back again, then you're going to type an email, and that might be customized. So you're seeing where you can sort of, depending on your business, put in the different types of follow-up as the lead is sort of cooling off here. Now, let's say the person did not reply to that email, then you might have the system convert over to more automated follow-up. It's like, well, I've got to go on to other clients who are requiring quotes, and I'm actually working. And so this is where I talk about, if you don't have the resources to continue to be calling that customer, or it's not practical, you're afraid that you're going to come across as overly aggressive, that kind of thing. Now the automation part of this kicks in, and maybe you have a secondary email that follows up that is plain text. It's still a template, but now you've used some dynamic placeholders that have customized it, so the system knows, okay, you haven't marked in your CRM, which again, everything would integrate. Your email campaign software would integrate with your CRM, and it would know where the customer is in terms of the sale based on inputs you've got in the system. But they haven't converted yet, and you haven't updated your notes to say that you've heard back, and you're not telling the system to put this on a back burner. Then what the system would do automatically would be, say, move to the next phase. Okay, I haven't heard from the person in a week. There's a follow-up email that uses, it looks like it's customized. It reads as if it was custom written for them, but in fact it's based on a template that you send to all customers who have went 1 week with no follow-up calls and no responses to other email and so on. So that's an example of a group that they would fall in. This is a unconverted customer that is 1 week old. And then it might be a different customer, so you'd have a different group. I don't want to spend too much time on designing a workflow, but I want you to understand how the blueprint would work here in the automations. But I also want you to grasp the concept of examples of groups. Another group might be a client who followed up or got a quote last year from you, and you've never heard from them before, or again since then, and none of your early follow-up actually resulted in a conversion. So you might put them in a different group, but they also transfer from one group to another as time progresses, as an example. So you set these parameters up in your software to make sure that they're getting the proper lead nurturing that leads to the objective you have, which is to convert them. At a certain point, I think it's really important to use some of those other tools that are available to you, like the more richly formatted type of email and HTML-based email, where you're actually including maybe videos, embedded images, you have headers and footers. They're much more design-based, and again, you spend your time designing these, but they're being used time and again, so that is highly leveraged time that you spend on the design, or we would do it for you again. You can always have somebody do this for you. If any of this intimidates you and you're like, well, that's not what we do, then our marketing department can set all of this up for you. But you still need to wrap your head around the concept and be familiar with it, comfortable with it, and give feedback. The more you understand, the more you can be a collaborative partner with a marketing agency like us to help you with these kinds of strategies. So the one disadvantage we talked about before is if you use a lot of HTML-based, highly templated, formatted email, it's more likely to be marked as spam or flagged by the webmail or the email client as a newsletter. And perhaps people are conditioned to avoid reading their newsletters because they get so many of them or whatever. The pro though, and the reason you might say, well then why would I use those at all? The benefit is because you always want to look to add value. Remember, we go back to the objective. What are we trying to do? We're trying to convert them. And what is the opposite of what we're trying to do? We don't want them to opt out or basically tell us, I'm never interested in hearing from you again. And so what you have to do is add value. So that's where it becomes, what sort of converts from follow-up to nurturing, where you're dripping on them, so to speak. You're continuing, it is a form of follow-up, but it's really nurturing. And what the nurturing is adding value to them, letting them know you haven't forgotten about them, a little message that tells them, hey, we would really be interested in getting your business. You might include an offer in this kind of email, but also you can include whatever value. You might have an ebook or a blog post or a video, something that helps them along based on what you know about them. And again, that might be in a group. So in my example of a tradesperson or a contractor who's involved in renovations, you might have people grouped by the type of renovation. You might have people who are interested in bathroom renovations in a different group than those on kitchens, and those who are having their basement renovated. And therefore the value that you add in terms of the attachments and links and that kind of stuff that you add in these HTML based, highly designed, formatted and templated emails, you would have different types of values. So you might send out, some kitchen design ideas to the group that's been quoted on kitchens and bathroom, and you get the idea. So that's how you can use these strategies and the different things that are available. The best practices, as I'm sharing with you, are really difficult without knowing your type of business and the level of contract and that kind of thing, the amount of resources you have. So what you need to know is what's available, and then strategize with the other stakeholders in your organization and begin with the end in mind. Your objectives. We want to keep the person, we want them to never opt out, we want to keep them communicating with us. We don't want them to forget about us, and therefore we got to add value. You don't want to be overly aggressive or annoying. These are the things that lead to people opting out. So if it's like, wow, this guy's really aggressive, he really cares more about just getting my money than actually helping me out. If anything like that is occurring in your customer's mind or your lead's mind, they're more likely to opt out. They're more likely to mark you as spam, delete, or unsubscribe. So just, frame everything through the lens of, if you were the customer, what would you appreciate? And it comes down to value. You want value. You want the person to go, hey, I actually appreciate this. I get tips, I get some ideas, whatever the case may be. Also, they let me know when they're having a special, so there's 10% off on renovations throughout the month of July or whatever. So you might have seasonality to your business, and when you're not as busy working, you offer specials, and people stay opted in to your nurturing campaigns because they want to know when you're having a special. And this also, when we talk about lead nurturing, this isn't just for completely unconverted customers, or leads rather. These can be, there can be great strategies designed around retention and retaining customers for the hopes of repeat business or referrals. So bear that in mind as well when you create your strategy. It's like, okay, yeah, this guy purchased and maybe he did his basement renovation in my example, but I'm still going to nurture him because he may forward this email to someone else that he knows. So maybe part of your email campaign, you put him in a group of a satisfied customer, or maybe just in a group that is a customer. And in that campaign, that group now gets email campaigns that encourages them to give you a Google review or to write a testimonial for you, this kind of thing. So you can see where your strategies vary based on the group and based on what your objective is at that point in their journey and their relationship with your company. So referrals are another one. You might have a referral program or a loyalty program when you're getting another order, 10% off your next order, these types of things. I'm not going to give you so many ideas today. That's not what this is about. It's for you to just wrap your head around the possibilities, because many of you are either failing to follow up entirely because you don't have the resources, or you're not using the best practices. Sometimes I'll get a follow-up email from a business and then I'll never hear from them again. Others I'm very impressed by, and some of them do such a great job of designing these templates that I can't tell if they're writing that directly to me. I'm in the business, and I really have an appreciation for someone who drafts and composes an email in such a way that it really seems like it's personalized to me. And I'm not just talking about dynamic placeholders where it is addressed to me. That's sort of a minimum. That's a low score. But when it looks like it's really relevant to our journey here, where I am in the process of communication with them, then that is a best practice. So take the time to write the email in such a way that it could be generic, but it comes across as being specific. This is not disingenuous. You've all received email like this, and sometimes it could be creepy. You wouldn't want an email from Amazon that you thought was so specific to you that that it comes across as creepy. You understand there's an algorithm, there's a formula, you're in a group. You get that. People understand that these days. And so it's not disingenuous, it's better customer service. You want to be in a group. You don't want to be served an email campaign, some sort of message that's completely irrelevant to you. And we get so much of that. So this is where the grouping and considering how am I going to add value comes into play here. Those are the best practices. Now, if you've stuck with me this far into the video, and for those of you especially who follow a lot of my video content, you must be thinking, Michael, we've gone this far, you haven't mentioned measurements yet. Well, don't worry, that's what we're getting to right now. The final part of this comes down to analytics and measuring. So these tools that we would advise you to use, they have really powerful analytics that let you know whether or not somebody opened your email, whether it bounced, the email address wasn't even valid, whether they read that, whether they clicked on any of the links, where they ended up on your website. All these types of things are very available. They're very commonplace now, and they're very critical to understanding where the person would go in terms of the group. So what we do in our company, for example, if we notice that we have somebody in our email campaign and there's a long enough time goes by where they're just not opening any of ours, we will just take them out. And there's reasons to do that related to these webmail systems and email clients that might eventually recognize their algorithms will recognize it as spam. So they're looking at for their users. So let's say you have a particular webmail system and it notices that you've never read a particular newsletter campaign or whatever it may be, that they think they're doing you a favor by marking that as spam. If you look in your folder, in your spam folder, you will notice from time to time that things that you've never marked as spam eventually get marked as spam. And that can be, there's all sorts of algorithmic reasons for that. It can be a lot of other people marked it as spam, and so it flags it for spam as everybody. These are things to bear in mind. So our company, what we do is we will filter out. If we don't see that anyone's getting any value from it, we will eventually opt out for them. We'll stop sending them stuff, or we will really decrease the frequency. And that's where those groups come in. And this is also what I was talking about, is the analytics and measuring, taking a look. You don't want to treat everyone the same. And if you're not measuring, if you're not using the analytics tools that are available to you, you're going to end up treating everybody as one group. There's nothing wrong with sending an email campaign that goes to everyone. There are certain email offers you have that you want to go to each and every person in your campaign. But I just thought of one that I've observed businesses do in the past, where somebody bought yesterday and then you send to everyone. Everyone's in the same group, and you send a special today of 10% off. Now, that can really annoy your customer. It's like, at minimum, they're going to probably come to you and say, I'd like my 10% off. Well, actually, that's not at minimum. Some of them will just be annoyed, depending on the product or service you're selling. And if you don't have the ability or the willingness to offer that 10% discount to somebody who bought yesterday or last month or whatever the case may be, then you certainly don't want to be sending them that offer. And you may have reasons for why you're able to offer that 10% off now and you weren't able to last month or whatever. You might have reductions in supply. We don't need to get into all that, but you can appreciate why you want a group. You want to use filters to create these groups and be offering value according to what the specific group is and where they are in their sales process, in their journey, in the blueprint. I think that's enough for today. I hope you got an idea of how to go through this. I will endeavor to create some sort of download for you that will be able to help you put this in your mind's eye and visualize this better. And I hope you took down some sort of note that you're going to implement in your business today. Like maybe all you're going to do is you're going to reach out to us and you're going to say, can you give me a quote on doing our email campaigns or something like that. Maybe that's your homework, or you're going to write and you're going to compose your very first. You're going to take a trial run at composing an email that might be a template, and Ask yourself, how can I use this if you're not already doing it? Don't be one of those businesses that isn't taking advantage and leveraging the technology that's available today and making the effort. You're not too busy for this. You need to do this. To the extent that you don't do this and your competition does, you know what I'm going to say. You are going to lose market share. You are going to fail. Eventually, this will lead to your demise. You've got to take advantage of these things that are available to you these days. So that's why I want to leave it today. Hope you got something out of it. If you did, or if you didn't, if you want to push back, if you want to argue with me, if you want to say, well, you completely left out the following points, whatever you want to say, leave it in the comments, because when the community reads those comments, we learn, and we need to learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.